Hello, welcome to fantasy lesson number 12. Hey, we are going to be finishing The Thief of Always in this lesson, so I'm quite excited about that. We're also going to be talking about stereotypes. In our last lesson, we looked at archetypes. Archetypes are a pattern in which characters might be drawn or designed. For example, the hero, the villain, the wise person, etc. A stereotype is an oversimplification of how people might act based on oftentimes a misconception. So we're going to look at stereotypes. Archetypes I think of as more of a positive. Stereotypes I think of more as a negative. I'm going to zoom out of here. We're going to take a look at some different images. Then we're going to listen to the end of Thief of Always, and then we'll talk a little bit about gender stereotypes or the lack thereof in The Thief of Always. All right, let's go.
Okay, so this one kills me. Take a look at this one. This one was taken from approximately the 1950s. It is an advertisement for lipstick, and it starts off with Ask a Man, and essentially ask a man if you look beautiful in the lipstick. So the media portrays a lot of images and a lot of stereotypes on gender. Here's an example of that. Though there are a lot of messages that we are still getting on gender stereotypes, even though this is from the 1950s. When I grew up in the 1990s, as a woman or girl at the time, I was expected to do the dishes, clean the house, uh, do different things, and my brother was expected to do the yard work, uh, fix some things. And so I was definitely raised with different gender stereotypes. As a parent, I'm trying to be really cognizant of that, really careful of that, and not reinforce gender stereotypes. Though I have to tell you, my children still take after different gender stereotypes that I see all the time. So I wanted us to look a little bit at the Disney princesses and see what we noticed. All right, so let's take a look at this image. These Disney princesses are some of the originals, though I would argue that Jasmine came later. She came out, I believe, in the 1990s. And I noticed some things about these Disney princesses. They are all smiling. Nearly all of them are wearing dresses. They are all slender. And all but Jasmine are white. It seems like Disney got the message a little bit and has expanded their idea of what is a princess. We've been introduced to princesses of different races, though I still notice they're all smiling, they're all slender, and they're nearly all wearing dresses. I wonder what message this sends to children. Another thing to notice with the Disney princesses, they oftentimes experience trouble or experience a challenge. And who saves the day? It's usually the male. Now, when I think of more modern day princesses, they have changed that. But when you look back at the originals, Sleeping Beauty, Little Mermaid, Cinderella, men came and saved the day for them. What message does that send? I love this image from Wreck-It Ralph. Penelope is definitely breaking the mold of a princess. She is feisty. She is strong. She is very determined. She doesn't oftentimes wear dresses. She isn't smiling in this picture. Whereas when you look at the other princesses, they are kind of trying to smile. So I find that Penelope was a good example of breaking the mold of gender stereotypes for princesses.
Blood and bone, however. He had used the magic Rictus had unwillingly provided to create another body. In the high times of his evil, Hood had been the house. Now it was the other way around. The house, what was left of it, had become Mr. Hood. Chapter 25. The Vortex. His eyes were made of broken mirrors, and his face of gouged stone. He had a mane of splinters and limbs of timber. He had shattered slates for teeth and rusty screws for fingernails, and a cloak of rotted drapes that scarcely hid the darkness of his heart from sight. "So, thief," he said, ignoring Rictus's pitiful struggles. "You see me as the man was, or rather, as a copy of that man. Is it what you expected?" "Yes," Harvey said. "It's exactly what I expected." "Oh?" "You're dirt and muck and bits and pieces," Harvey said. "You're nothing." "Nothing, am I?" said Hood. "Nothing? Ha! I'll show you, thief. I'll show you what I am." "Let me kill him for you," Rictus managed to gasp. "You needn't bother. I'll do it." "You brought him here," Hood said, turning his splintered eyes on his servant. "You're to blame." "He's just a boy. I can deal with him. Just let me do it. Let me—" Before Rictus could finish, Hood took hold of his servant's head, and with one short motion simply twisted it off. A yellowish cloud of foul-smelling air rose from the severed neck, and Rictus, the last of Hood's abominable quartet, perished in an instant. Hood let the head go from his hand. It flew up into the air like an unknotted balloon, giving off a farting sputter as it looped the loop and finally fell, emptied, to the ground. Hood casually dropped the body, which had summarily shrunk to nothing, and turned his mirrored gaze back upon Harvey. "Now, thief," he said, "you will see power." His mane of splinters stood on end, as though every one of them was ready to pierce Harvey's heart. His mouth grew wide as a tunnel, and a blast of sour, icy air rose from his belly. "Come closer," he roared, opening his arms. The rags that clung there billowed and spread like the wings of some ancient vampire. A vampire that had dined on the blood of pterodactyl and tyrannosaur. "Come," he said again, "or must I come for you?" Harvey didn't waste his breath with a reply. He'd need every gasp he had if he was to outpace this horror. Not even certain what direction he was taking, he turned on his heels and ran, as another blast of soul-freezing air struck him. The ground was treacherous, slippery and strewn with rubble. He fell within 6 strides, and glanced back to see Hood descending upon him with a vengeful shriek. He hauled himself to his feet, Hood's rusted nails missing him by a whistling inch, and had taken 3 stumbling strides from Hood's shadow when he heard Lulu calling his name. He veered in the direction of her voice, but Hood caught the collar of his jacket. "Got you, little thief," he roared, dragging Harvey back into his splintery embrace. Before Hood could catch better hold, however, Harvey threw back his arms and pitched himself forward. Off came the jacket, and he made a third dash for freedom, his eyes fixed on Lulu, who was beckoning him toward her. She was standing on the edge of the lake, he realized, perched inches from the spinning waters. Surely she didn't imagine they could escape into the lake. The vortex would tear them limb from limb. "We can't," he yelled to Lulu. "We must," she called back. "It's the only way." He was within 3 strides of her now. He could see her bare feet slithering and sliding on the slimy rock as she fought to keep her balance. He reached out for her, determined to snatch her from her perch before she fell. But her eyes weren't on him. They were on the monster at his back. "Lulu," he yelled to her, "don't look!" But her gaze was fixed upon Hood, her mouth agape, and Harvey couldn't help but glance back to see what fascinated her so. Hood's pursuit had thrown his coat of rags into disarray. and there was something between its folds, he saw, darker than any night sky or lightless cellar. What was it? The essence of his magic, perhaps, guarding his loveless heart? "Do you give up?" Hood said, driving Harvey back onto the rocks beside Lulu. "Surely you would not choose the vortex over me." "Go," Harvey murmured to Lulu, his gaze still fixed on the mystery beneath Hood's coat. He felt her hand grasp his for a moment. "It's the only way," she said. Then her fingers were gone, and he was standing on the rocks alone. "If you choose the flood, you will die horribly," Hood was saying. "It will spin you apart, whereas He extended an inviting hand to Harvey, stepping up onto the rock as he did so. "I offer you an easy death, rocked to sleep on a bed of illusions." He made a smile, and it was the foulest sight Harvey had ever seen. "Choose," he said. Out of the corner of his eye, Harvey glimpsed Lulu. She had not fled, as he'd thought. She'd simply gone to find a weapon. And she had one, a piece of timber dragged out of the rubble. It would be precious little use against Hood's enormity, Harvey knew, but he was glad not to be alone in these last moments. He looked up at Hood's face. "Maybe I should sleep," he said. The Vampire King smiled. "Wise little thief," he replied, opening his arms to invite the boy into his shadow. Harvey took a step over the rock toward Hood, raising his hand as he did so. His face was reflected in the shattered mirrors of the vampire's eyes. Two thieves in one head. "Sleep," said Hood. But Harvey had no intention of sleeping yet. Before Hood could stop him, he grabbed hold of the creature's coat and pulled. The scraps came away with a wet tearing sound, and Hood let out a howl of rage as he was uncovered. There was no great enchantment at his heart. In fact, there was no heart at all. There was only a void, neither cold nor hot, living nor dead, made not of mystery but of nothingness, the illusionist's illusion. Furious at this revelation, Hood let out another roar of rage and reached down to reclaim the rags of his coat from the thief's hands. Harvey took a quick step backwards, however, avoiding the fingers by a whisker. Hood came raging after him, his soul squealing on the rock, leaving Harvey with no choice but to retreat another step until he had nowhere to go but the flood. Again, Hood snatched at the filched rags, and would have had both coat and thief in one fatal grasp, had Lulu not run at him from behind, swinging the timber like a baseball bat. She struck the back of Hood's knee so hard, her weapon shattered, the impact pitching her to the ground. The blow was not without effect, however. It threw Hood off balance, and he flailed wildly, the thunder of the vortex shaking the rock on which he and Harvey perched, and threatening to toss them both into the maelstrom. Even now, Hood was determined to claim his rags back from Harvey and conceal the void in him. "Give me my coat, thief!" he howled. "It's all yours," Harvey yelled, and tossed the stolen rags toward the waters. Hood lunged after them, and as he did so, Harvey flung himself back toward solid ground. He heard Hood shriek behind him and turned to see the Vampire King, the rags in his fist, pitch head first into the frenzied waters. The maned head surfaced a moment later, and Hood struck out for the bank, but strong as he was, the vortex was stronger. It swept him away from the rocks, drawing him toward its center, where the waters were spiraling down into the earth. In terror, he started to plead for assistance, his pitiful bargains only audible when the whirlpool carried him to the bank, where Harvey and Lulu now stood. "Thief!" he yelled. "Help me, and I'll give you the world forever and ever." Then the ferocity of the waters began to rip at his makeshift body, tearing out his nails and rattling out his teeth, washing away his mane of splinters and shaking his limbs apart at the joints. Reduced to a living litter of flotsam and jetsam, He was drawn into the white waters at the whirlpool's heart, and shrieking with rage, went where all evil must go at last, into nothingness. On the shore, Harvey put his arms around Lulu, laughing and sobbing at the same time. "We did it," he said. "Did what?" said a voice at their backs, and they looked around to see Wendell wandering toward them, blithe as ever. Every article of clothing he'd found in the rubble was either too large or too small. "What's been going on?" he wanted to know. "What are you laughing at? What are you crying for?" He looked beyond Harvey and Lulu, in time to see the last fragments of Hood's body disappear with a fading howl. "And what was that?" he demanded. Harvey wiped the tears from his cheeks and got to his feet. At last, he had a purpose for Wendell's perpetual reply. "Who cares?" he said. Chapter 26. Living Proof. The wall of mist still hovered at the edge of Hood's domain, and it was there that the survivors gathered to say their farewells. None quite knew what adventures lay on the other side of the mist, of course. Each of the children had come into the house from a different year. Would they all find that age, give or take a month or two, awaiting them on the other side? "Even if we don't get the stolen years back," Lulu said as they prepared to step into the mist, "we're free because of you, Harvey." There were murmurs of thanks from the little crowd, and a few grateful tears. "Say something," Wendell hissed to Harvey. "Why? Because you're a hero?" "I don't feel like one." "So tell them that." Harvey raised his hands to hush the murmurs. "I just want to say, we'll probably all forget about being here in a little while." A few of the children said, "No, we won't," or "We'll always remember you." But Harvey insisted. "We will," he said. "We'll grow up, and we'll forget, unless—" "Unless what?" asked Lulu. "Unless we remind ourselves every morning, or make a story of it, and tell everyone we meet." "They won't believe us," said one of the children. "That doesn't matter," said Harvey. "We'll know it's true, and that's what counts." This met with approval from all sides. "Now, let's go home," said Harvey. "We've wasted too much time here already." Wendell nudged him in the ribs as the group dispersed. "What about telling them you're not a hero?" he said. "Oh, yeah," said Harvey with a mischievous smile. "I forgot about that." The first of the children were already braving the wall of mist, eager to put the horrors of Hood's prison behind them as soon as possible. Harvey watched them fading with every step they took, and wished he had a moment to talk to them, to find out who they were and why they had wandered into Hood's grip. Had they been orphans, with no other place to call home? Or runaways, like Wendell and Lulu? Or simply bored with their lives, the way he'd been bored, and seduced by illusions? He would never know. They were disappearing one by one, until there was only Lulu, Wendell, and himself left on the inside of the wall. "Well," Wendell said to Harvey, "if time really is set to rights out there, then I'm going back a few more years than you." "That's true." "If we meet again, I'm going to be a lot older. You may not even know me." "I'll know you," Harvey said. "Promise?" said Wendell. "I promise." With that they shook hands, and Wendell made his departure into the mist. He was gone in 3 strides. Lulu sighed heavily. "Have you ever wanted 2 things at the same time?" she asked Harvey. "But you knew you couldn't have both of them?" "Once or twice," said Harvey. "Why?" "Because I'd like to grow up with you and be your friend," she replied. "But I also want to go home. And I think in the year that's waiting for me on the other side of that wall, you haven't even been born." Harvey nodded sadly, glancing back toward the ruins. "I guess we do have one thing to thank Hood for." "What's that?" "We were children together," he said, taking hold of her hand. "At least for a little while." Lulu tried to smile, but her eyes were full of tears. "Let's go together as far as we can," Harvey said. "Yes, "I'd like that," Lulu replied, and hand in hand they walked toward the wall. At the last moment before the mist eclipsed them, they looked around at each other, and Harvey said, "Home." Then they stepped into the wall. For the first stride he felt Lulu's hand in his, but by the second stride it had grown faint, and by the third, when he stepped out into the street, it and she had gone completely, delivered back into the time from which she'd stepped all those seasons ago. Harvey looked up at the sky. The sun had set, but its pinkish light still found the ribs of cloud laid high above him. The wind was gusty and chilled the sweat of fear and exertion on his face and spine. Teeth chattering, he started home through the darkening streets, uncertain what awaited him. It was strange that after so many victories, the simple business of walking home should defeat him. But defeat him it did. After an hour of wandering, his wits and strength, which had preserved him from every terror Hood could conjure, failed him. His head began to spin, his legs buckled beneath him, and he fell down on the sidewalk, exhausted. Luckily, 2 passers-by took pity on him and gently asked him where he lived. It was dangerous, he vaguely recalled, to trust his life to total strangers, but he had no choice. All he could do was give himself over to their care and hope that the world he'd returned to still had a little kindness in it. He woke in darkness, and for one heart-stopping moment, he thought the black lake had claimed him after all, and he was down in its depths, a prisoner. Crying out in terror, he sat up, and to his infinite relief saw the window at the bottom of his bed, the curtains slightly parted, and heard the light patter of rain upon the sill. He was home. He swung his legs out of bed and stood up. His whole body ached as though he'd gone 10 rounds with a heavyweight boxer, but he was strong enough to hobble to the door and open it. The sound of 2 familiar voices drifted up from the bottom of the stairs. "I'm just happy he's home," he heard his mom say. "So am I," said his dad. "But we need some explanations." "We'll get them," his mom went on, "but we shouldn't push him too hard." Clinging to the banisters as he went, Harvey started down the stairs, while his mom and dad continued to talk. "We need to find out the truth quickly," his father said. "I mean, suppose he was involved with something criminal." "Not Harvey." "Yes, Harvey. You saw the state of him. Blood and dirt all over him. He's not been out picking roses, that's for sure." At the bottom of the stairs, Harvey halted, a little afraid to face the truth. Had anything changed, or were the 2 people just out of sight still old and frail? He went to the door and pushed it open. His mom and dad were standing with their backs to him at the window, staring out at the rain. "Hello," he said. They both turned at the same moment, and Harvey let out a whoop of joy to see that all the griefs and horrors of the house had not been endured in vain. Here was his prize, staring down at him, his mother and father, looking just the way they had before Rictus had come for him. The stolen years were back where they belonged, in his possession. "I am a good thief," he said, half to himself. "Oh, my darling," said his mom, coming to him with open arms. He hugged her first, then his dad. "What have you been up to, son?" his dad wanted to know. Harvey remembered how difficult it had been to explain everything last time. So instead of even trying, he said, "I was just wandering around and I got lost. I didn't mean to get you upset." "You said something about a thief." "Did I?" "You know you did," his dad said sternly. "Well, are you a thief if you're taking something that belongs to you in the first place?" Harvey asked him. His dad and mom exchanged puzzled looks. "No, honey," his mom said. "Of course not." "Then I'm not a thief," Harvey replied. "I think you owe both of us the truth, Harvey," his mom said. "We want to know everything." "Everything?" "Everything," said his dad. So he told them the whole tale, just as they'd asked, right from the beginning. And if their expressions had been doubtful the last time he'd related his adventures, they were incredulous now. "Do you really expect us to believe all of this?" His father broke in while Harvey was talking about meeting Hood in the attic. "I can take you to the house," Harvey said. "Or what's left of it. I couldn't find it last time because it hid itself from grown-ups, but Hood's gone, so there's no magic left to hide it with." Once again, his mom and dad exchanged baffled looks. "If you can find this Hood house," his father said, "we'd both like to see it." They set out early the following day, and this time, just as Harvey had expected, the way back to the house was not concealed by magic. He found the streets that Rictus had first led him along easily enough, and very soon the gentle slope on which the house had once stood came into view. "That's it," he said to his mom and dad. "The house stood there." "It's just a hill, Harvey," his dad said. "A hill covered in grass." It was indeed a surprise to see that the ground on which so many terrible deeds had been done had greened so quickly. "It all looks rather pretty," his mom said, as they came to the place where the mist wall had stood. "The ruins are under there, I swear," Harvey said, venturing onto the slope. "I'll show you. Come on." They weren't the only visitors here today. There were several kite flyers plying the wind at the top of the ridge, a dozen or more dogs romping around, children laughing as they rolled down the slope, even a pair of lovers, whispering in each other's ears. Harvey resented the presence of all these people. How dare they romp and laugh and fly their kites here, he thought, as though it were just another hill. He wanted to tell them all that they were cavorting on the ruins of a vampire's house, and see how quickly that wiped the smiles off their faces. But then, he thought, perhaps it was better this way. Better that the hill not be haunted by rumors and stories. The name of Hood would probably never cross the lips of these lovers and kite flyers, and why should it? His evil had no place in happy hearts. "Well," said Harvey's dad as the three of them climbed the slope, "this house of yours is well buried." Harvey went down on his haunches and dug at the dirt with his bare hands. The ground was soft and gave off the sweet smell of fertility. "Strange, isn't it?" said a voice. He looked up from his labors, both his fists full of dirt. A man a little older than his father was standing a few yards from him, smiling. "What are you talking about?" Harvey asked. "The flowers, the ground," he said. "Maybe the earth has its own magic. Good magic, I mean, and it's buried Hood's memory forever." "You know about Hood?" Harvey said. The man nodded. "Oh, yes." "What exactly do you know?" Harvey's mom asked. "Our son here's been telling us such strange stories." "They're all true," the man said. "You haven't even heard them," Harvey's dad replied. "You should trust your boy," the man said. "I have it on the best authority that he's a hero." Harvey's dad stared at his son with a twitch of a smile on his face. "Really?" he said. "Were you one of Hood's prisoners?" "Not me," the man said. "Then how do you know?" The man glanced over his shoulder, and there at the bottom of the slope stood a woman in a white dress. Harvey studied the stranger, trying to make out her face, but her wide-brimmed hat kept her features in shadow. He started to get to his feet, intending to take a closer look, but the man said, "Don't, please. She sent me in her place just to say hello. She remembers you the way you are. Young, that is, and she'd like you to remember her the same way." "Lulu," Harvey murmured. The man neither confirmed nor denied this. He simply said to Harvey, "I am much obliged to you, young man. I hope to be as fine a husband to her as you were a friend." "Husband?" Harvey mouthed. "How time flies," the man said, consulting his watch. "We're late for lunch. May I shake your hand, young sir?" "It's dirty," Harvey warned, letting the earth run between the fingers of his right hand. "What could be better between us," the man replied with a smile, "than this healing earth?" He took Harvey's hand, shook it, and with a nod to Harvey's mom and dad, hurried back down the slope. Harvey watched as he spoke to the woman in the white dress, saw her nod, saw her smile in his direction. Then they were both gone, out into the street and away. "Well," said Harvey's dad, "it seems your Mr. Hood existed after all." "So you believe me?" Harvey asked. "Something happened here," came the reply. "And you were a hero. I believe that." "Then that's enough," said Harvey's mom. "You don't have to keep digging, sweetie. Whatever's under there should stay buried." Harvey was about to empty his left hand of dirt when his dad said, "Let me have that," and opened his hand. "Really?" said Harvey. "I've heard a little good magic's always useful," came his father's reply. "Isn't that right?" Harvey smiled and poured a fistful of earth into his father's palm. "Always," he said. The days that followed were unlike any Harvey had ever known. Though there was no more talk of Hood, or of the house, or of the green hill upon which it had once stood, the subject was a part of every look and laugh that passed between him and his parents. He knew they had only the vaguest sense of what had happened to them, but they were all three agreed on one thing, that it was fine to be together again. Time would be precious from now on. It would tick by, of course, as it always had. But Harvey was determined he wouldn't waste it with sighs and complaints. He'd fill every moment with the seasons he'd found in his heart, hopes like birds on a spring branch, happiness like a warm summer sun, magic like the rising mists of autumn, and best of all, love. Love enough for 1,000 Christmases.
Okay, so that was Thief of Always. Hopefully you liked this story. What did you notice about gender stereotypes? Did you notice that Harvey was fulfilling a male stereotype? He was the hero. He was the one that saved the day. And so that as an idea that males are needed to rescue females and save the day is reinforcing a gender stereotype. Lulu, on the other hand, was breaking a gender stereotype. She was able to help Harvey defeat Hood. She was fighting, she was a partner to Harvey, and her strength and her ability to fight broke the gender stereotype. I always find it more interesting when stereotypes are broken because it makes us think a little bit more. It's a little bit more exciting. And also, we all know that all people are capable of being strong and saving the day. I also want to note that when I was looking for fantasy books, it is particularly difficult to find a lot of fantasy books that have diverse characters. So many of, especially the older fantasy books, have white humans in them. If they have humans, they are generally white. It is not until recently that I've noticed that fantasy books have come out with books that feature different races. So that's one thing to notice too, because there will be racial stereotypes in books as well. Are they fulfilling something? Are they making you question? You really want to pay attention to how the characters are portrayed, their gender, their race, and really question that and think about that deeply, because these messages that our media is sending, that we are reading, that we are getting, should always be questioned, right? We don't want to just believe everything that we are told. Just like my daughter who relishes in being fancy and being a princess, it makes me a little bit nuts, and it's not what I want for her, but it's what she's into, so I need to let her be her. But at the same time, I don't like the messages that they are sending. So I oftentimes will try to help her question, oh, do you need to do that? Things like that. So, we have one more film. It is our final project for this unit. That will be Fantasy Lesson 13. And otherwise, enjoy your stories, enjoy your fantasy books, pay attention to stereotypes, both with gender and with race, and let's talk about it soon. All right, bye-bye.